the future, the newspaper of the future. Don't say, and it always will be. We'll be wise guys. So representing, we have a number of different models, business models presented here. We have the independent press. That's Michael Shapiro's company. That's the alternativepress.com as an example of that. We have a combination, print and digital, NewYorkTimes.com. Corporate, the big corporate sponsor, the so-called 700-pound gorilla, the Patch AOL. We have my little thing that I'm involved in. We have a dues and donations supported HardingOnline.com, little community out in New Jersey. Probably the longest running citizen-supported journal. It started in papers, we're not sure when, 1970-ish. That's how I'm interested in this, and also as an investor, I was looking at AOL. But so that's a whole different one. We have $23,000 in revenues, and everything else is free. Foundations, also something I'm somewhat involved in. Foundations and nonprofits. The Center for Civic Responsibility, a group that's kind of a clean government, get citizens involved, grassroots group to get citizens involved in New Jersey. They are sponsoring seeding hyperlocal journals in Paterson, which is a place nobody wants to go as a profit making. We got that going. And we're starting one in New Brunswick any day now. And then other hyperlocal media kinds of things, of course, your public access stations. Let's take just back up for a second. Let's look at newspapers and what they do, and how some of what they do has been scraped away, as it were, by other kinds of things. On the news and government, schools, sports, business, a lot of those guys have their own sites. There's lots of information there that they're putting out. Do they have the traffic to get in front of people, et cetera, et cetera? Not necessarily. For idea kinds of things, you know, letters to the editors and opinions, there's people blogging all over the place, and some of them even eventually sell out. Advertising, notice where the big money first went, the names you recognize, are Craigslist, eBay, that's going to say central listing. Sorry, I forgot to fix that slide. And Facebook, Twitter, Groupon. So the big names went right for where the money is. And then special interests kinds of stories you see in a newspaper, or people and clubs and civic organizations all running their own sites. And then another, let's not forget the virtuous circle of media, where good content draws more eyeballs, which draws advertising, which allows you to fund better content and get more eyeballs and sell more advertising, and it's virtuous. So keying off that, let's think about some of the problems in the hyperlocal, because they've been around and they're not taking off as fast as Groupon, say, or anything else. Problem number one, if you read about all this stuff, is the content. It's uneven, I guess is the polite way you could say it. They'll say the editor is clearly key. A passionate, informed editor that can herd the cats of the journalists. The citizen journalists often have passion, but they're often not constant. They get in there involved in one thing on the school board, write it up, and then get kind of exhausted and bag it. So you have continuous churn, and you have the problem of how to pay them. If you don't get it going, then how do you pay them and keep the virtuous circle going? So that's a big problem I'd like to talk about, have our panelists talk about. A potential solution, there are some solutions here. Different organizations, the handbook for citizen journalists, that's the one put out by the group I told you I was involved in, teaches journalists that are covering government about the various centers of power in a community. School board, planning board, town council, and the hidden one is the parties in a town. Very powerful. People don't know about this. So there's, you know, 3 branches of government at the federal level. I dare say if you did a survey of people at the civic level, at the municipal level, they would have no idea. Those are your 3 big levers of power. Anyway, we train people on how to that. We'll be happy to train citizen journalists in this. Just a week ago tomorrow, we gave a class for how to cover a school board budget. I thought I knew how to do that. I'd been doing it for 2 years in my little town. Went to this thing at the Rutgers School of Journalism this group put on. I just got 6 pages of notes. My hand was aching, and I just learned all this stuff. And I'm a financial analyzer, so it's to do it right, to get the content as good as it needs to be. It's quite difficult. New York Times Knowledge Network is an online course, And if you want to know about, by the way, the last thing here, if you want to know about what works and what doesn't, there's one thing maybe to take away is write that down, www.kcnn.org. There's a report that the Knight Group did about what works and what doesn't. They funded 40 some of these things and wrote a report over the last 2 years of what worked and what didn't. Very, very interesting. Passionate editor works and some of the other things. Technology is not a big deal. If anybody gets tired, if you spend eight of the first 10 months worrying about technology, you did something wrong, you just buy that off the shelf. Is one of the things they said. But all kinds of great advice like that. You're interested in starting one of these. Okay, back to the problems. Oops, that was a training. Big problem number 2, advertising sales. Remember I said it was content, eyeballs, advertising. It's a pretty simple business, if you think about it, for in a single site. So how do you sell to the local florist? Yeah, not very exciting. You don't go into PowerPoint, you walk in, and while making flowers, you say, would you like to advertise? Nice thing about it is they don't know CPMs, they're not very sophisticated. The bad thing about it is when the customers start trading down from 12 roses to 12 carnations, they go, I can cut this out easily because I'm not sure what good it did. So all kinds of marketing, guerrilla marketing, that's street fairs and block parties and clowns and balloons, speak to your Rotary Club, that sort of stuff. Another thing, if Groupon is taking a lot of the couponing and advertising out, is there a Groupon inside that you can put on a site? Well, answer is yes, there is, and people are doing that in the business. They all have to be commission-based, but there's the last problem. Oops, am I the wrong thing? Huh. The last thing is how do you find the killer producers? This is not a problem specific to hyperlocal journalism. This is a problem to a car dealership or General Electric. How do you find a good salesman? Ex ante, you can't tell. They've done study after study, you can't tell. It's not how they look, it's not how they talk, it's whatever. It's the guy that just won't give up. My favorite thing to think about in this is The Office. You've all seen the show The Office. Who is the #1 salesman in the office in the Scranton office of Dunder Mifflin? It's not cutesy Jim, it's not Phyllis, it's Dwight Schrute. You ever see him on the sales? He just will not stop. He is bulldog, fearless, and no shame. I think it's the critical one, no shame. If you walk in the floor and say, no, I don't think so. You can't, oh, I'm bummed out. Got to walk in and go into the pizza parlor and just walk out. And that's what it is. And finding those people, if you could figure out what that is for a hyperlocal, you'd be big. If you figure that out with any other business, you'd be big. But that's a huge problem. Problem number 3. So how do you sell the national brands if you're just doing a few communities or one in New Jersey? Well, AOL's strategy, of course, is to put together enough of these things, kind of like a string of billboards. If you own a great site for a billboard because you're the farmer and you used to have that, you have that land there right next to exit 32, it's not very easy for you to go to Cracker Barrel and say, I'll sell you this thing. You have to be part of a chain, and you work with Lamar or something like that. So they want a string of these things. So that's the idea of an AOL patch, all these patches, and I can offer a national advertiser billboard space, advertising space on a whole string of them. So if I'm a one-off city or a few cities, how do I duplicate that? Perhaps a confederation of them, much like a co-op does for the Wisconsin Cheese Council or something. A whole bunch of little dairy farmers, but they band together. So maybe is another way to skin that cat, and we don't have to give up. So these are some of the issues I hope our panelists will get into, and I'll turn it over to them in a second. But is it the time for hyperlocal news to be ripe or not? What services do consumers really want? What business models will prevail of those we talked about? How does journalism, or can journalism, compete with other hyperlocals for the eyeballs and the ad dollars? Technology, is there a way to leverage the problem of ad sales so it's not so labor intensive? Is there another way to leverage the content creation? Because content creation, I know from my dumb little newspaper and other people, is very, very difficult. It's a pain in the neck to sit there at a school board meeting for 3 hours and writing it up, or go around doing restaurant reviews. It just takes many hours. And then lastly, smartphones, tablets, all that, is that a big effect on the game, or it's just another piece of hardware? Like you used to have cell phones, and they had landline phones, and not a huge difference, perhaps. So again, we have panelists. 3 of them with different models, and an expert in the subject matter. So with that, I will turn it over to Jim Schachter, Associate Managing Editor of the New York Times.